Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on the various wildfires going on in Northern California. One thing I will say before we start the stream is I'm planning on this being a much more concise update and forecast than last night's. Certainly more concise because yesterday was about 7.5 hours, but...
Alright, it's time for
one sec. I just realized the volume where I have the live chat open had the volume on. Or the screen had the volume on. So, what we're going to be doing throughout this video is I want to just get the most important information out there in a much more concise format. One, because I think sometimes that's actually more helpful, and two, just because I don't imagine we could do a whole 6-hour live stream tonight, as most of the wildfire activity for the day today is already over. So, just looking at the satellite imagery, you can see there is a large amount of smoke over California, so throughout this update, I would say there is some good news and some bad news. And that's basically what we're going to be covering when it comes to the updates. And then we're also going to look at the forecast to see what the fire weather conditions are doing over the next 24 to 48 hours to see how all these fires might be changing in the future. So the first one I do want to go into is the Dixie Fire, because this is one of the fires that throughout the day today we did have some good news and some bad news. One, you can see those strong northerly winds did come in. You notice that the smoke is basically only blowing to the south right now, which is a big change from what we usually see, where usually on the Dixie Fire we have those southwesterly winds blowing that smoke up into places like Idaho and Oregon. So those northerly winds that we watched come in last night have been sticking around, and that is affecting our wildfire in a number of ways. For one, it cleared a lot of the smoke out, so we do have a fair bit of activity right now. You can see almost 5 distinct pyrocumulus clouds coming off of it right now. But in some areas, it's actually starting to push the fire back into where it's already burned. So over the next few hours, that should actually lead to some reduced behavior. Now, if we want to see which of those hotspots is actually the hottest right now, it looks like the southern edge of that northwestern portion of the Dixie Fire is seeing a lot of activity, and that spot fire that we watched go into Janesville just the other night, looks like that one is picking up as well and mostly moving down to the south. So when it comes to the Dixie Fire, one thing that helps kind of understand why we are seeing that activity right now is you do see that we are still under that red flag warning, because we do still have some strong winds, and as you could tell from the smoke, those winds are coming from the north, and that is affecting the direction that the fire is going in. So just looking at the red flag warning right here, the key thing to look at is how long it's going to last, and it looks like it's through August 19th, 11 a.m. So they are still predicting some strong winds for the northwestern portion of the fire throughout the night tonight, and that section just north of Lake Almanor. That's one of the key places we'll be watching, but it is at least encouraging to see that that spot fire is now out of that red flag warning. Now, also looking at this map, you can see where the most activity has been throughout the last 24 hours. Big change in how this map usually looks. Usually when we look at this map, you have all the hot spots out on the northern edge and the northeastern edge of the fire, and that's because we usually have those southwesterly winds, but you notice that a lot of the hotspots now are more on the southern edges of that fire perimeter because the winds are blowing that fire back down. So just looking at this map, there was a few things that's the reason it took a little while to start this video, as I was watching the Cal Fire update just to make sure I had all of my information correct when it came to what they think the weather is doing and what the key areas of concern are. One thing that they were saying is that the southern edge is still seeing some good containment down here. Then they also said that right here, because of that wind shift, that is an area that was seeing a lot of growth throughout the day today. But then when it comes to this northern edge up here, that kind of ties back into what I was saying earlier, where the winds, since they're coming from the north now, are actually blowing that northern part of the fire back into where it is already burned. So you can imagine if you had a lot of heat up here, the flames were being pushed by those southwesterly winds in the past. Now those northerly winds come in and just push that fire right back into itself. So it's actually helping to calm some of the fire activity down on this northern edge, because it's not being pushed into new fuel, it's being pushed into an area that doesn't really have any fuel anymore. But with that same kind of behavior, we are seeing a large amount of activity on that southern edge there. And then what I have been concerned about over the past couple of days, because we have been talking about that northerly wind shift, is the areas around Lake Almanor. So I do want to just go over to this map and look at where those live hotspots are right now. Because right here you can see exactly what I was just talking about, how it is making that southerly push on the northwest side right there. That is one of the parts of the Dixie Fire where we are seeing the most activity right now. And then right here is, or zooming in, right here is an area that I have been concerned about for maybe the past 2 days, once we saw that those winds were going to shift and become a lot more northerly. But that's actually why I waited to watch that Cal Fire update before starting this video, is I wanted to hear what they had to say about this. And it sounds like from their last update, they sound like they are fairly confident in this area around Lake Almanor and Westwood. Now, with that being said, we've seen how fast everything can change when it comes to wildfires, especially throughout the season when we have such critically dry fuels. We have seen some unprecedented behavior. But in the Cal Fire update just now, they were saying that they've done a lot of structure protection. They have some good dozer lines, some good containment lines. So it sounded like they were feeling fairly confident around Lake Almanor and Westwood as well, which is huge because that is one of the key areas that I was concerned about. Now, part of the reason I was concerned is if we look, I think I have the imagery for that spot somewhere in here. There it is. So you can see where that camera is. It's pointing right over where those structures are on the northern shore of Lake Almanor. So I pulled this up, and originally I was worried about this area because you can see the increase in fire activity over the last 3 hours. Certainly see that smoke plume coming up. I would say it's not as extreme of a pyrocumulus as we have been seeing in a lot of our past days, where we get that huge puffy white pyrocumulus cloud. But given the fact that there was some fire activity at all, and you can see the direction those winds are blowing that smoke towards the lake right there, that is why I was concerned about that area. But again, Cal Fire does sound like they're feeling confident there. But we are also seeing this area start to make a little bit of a push towards Westwood. So I do plan on continuing to watch this area, and I'd imagine that there's still evacuation orders in place right there. We can actually look at that right here. Yeah, so I think that's all still an area with evacuation orders. So don't believe anybody would actually still be in that area. But if you are, you do still have 2 hotspots in those northerly winds. So we will keep an eye on that moving forward. Now, another area of this fire that has been seeing a lot of activity throughout the past couple of days, and fair bit of activity today because of how the winds were being funneled. It was increasing the fire behavior on this northern finger right here. But the good news is that because of that wind shift, it's actually starting to push that fire a little bit back into where it has previously burned in the past. And the really good news there is it's no longer burning closer towards Susanville. There was an update, I think 2 nights ago, when it was just getting, every time we updated the map, it was getting closer and closer towards Susanville because we had those southwesterly winds at about 35 miles per hour continuing to push it farther up to the northeast. But as those winds have shifted around, it's been pushing this fire back down to the southwest. So good news for Susanville, but we will have to keep an eye on Westwood there, as we have seen some new hotspots popping up, moving down right there. And I believe we actually have the camera roughly on that area as well. Actually, this one is more pointed up. You can see it goes over Taylorsville and almost pointed directly at Janesville, way in the far distance. And if we look at where that is on this hotspot map, I believe the camera would be right around here, most likely looking at these hotspots. Let's see that again. I just want to make sure that we're looking at this correctly. So, camera is right behind Taylorsville almost looks like it's pointed directly at Janesville. So most likely looking at this hotspot right here. So if we want to see what that's doing, that is another area where we have seen some activity pick up this afternoon as some of those strong winds did come in. I was looking at some of the observations, and I was seeing some wind gusts around 20 to 25 miles per hour. So anytime that happens, you are going to have a fair bit of fire activity, and you can see that that is one of the parts of the Dixie Fire where we are seeing a rather large smoke plume, but what you notice is it looks a lot flatter than usual, and that's partly because the winds are stronger, so it has less ability to go straight up, and it's just basically being pushed a lot more flat right now, but slightly looks like it's calmed down in the last 15 minutes, so that would be some good news there if it continues to calm down. So we looked at the Dyer Mountain camera. That one, just looking at it one more time, I'd say that was slightly looking like it's calming down as well as those winds start to ease and our temperatures start to drop into the evening, but we do still have some gusty winds, so I will continue to watch that one right there. And then the spot that we've been watching, I think the closest over the last few days, and I saved this for last because I think this is where some of the bad news comes in, although one thing I will point out is that hotspot we were just looking at, you can see actually, since the last time I updated, it has started to move farther south. So, again, that's that northerly winds pushing that hotspot farther south. We are seeing it get a bit closer to, I believe that's Taylorsville right there. So, we'll be watching that. I do know Cal Fire has a large amount of resources in there, and they didn't immediately say anything about that area in their Cal Fire update. So, we will keep an eye on it, but so far, I hope there's not any huge cause for concern yet, but we are going to continue to see those winds picking up, so I will watch to see if the hotspots continue to make that southern push into where we do see some of those structures there. But the area we've been watching the closest over the last few days is that spot fire. You can see that it's a spot fire right here that I believe it was 2 nights ago at this point moved into Janesville, and it did lead to some destroyed structures in Janesville, which was unfortunate news, and some of that damage assessment report has started to come back, so we'll actually look at where those structures were in a second. But then the big wind shift happened, which is very good news for Janesville. It happened last night. We actually saw it happen during the live stream, where it switched to a much northerly direction, started to push this hotspot much farther down to the south, which again is good news for Janesville, but bad news for these various areas south of, on the southern edge of, I believe that's called Honey Lake right there, and I believe that's Milford right there, where I remember some evacuation orders being put in place last night for these communities right here, and unfortunately we are continuing to see that hotspot right there make a southern push, so that is another one of the areas that I'm watching the closest over the next 24 to 48 hours. And one interesting thing that Cal Fire did say is that they are guessing that in the next 24 to 36 hours that the Dixie Fire and that spot fire will officially merge. You can see how close it is right now, and they're expecting that with all that fire activity, especially what we're seeing on that northeastern spot fire, or the northeastern spot fire right there, can see that looks to be one of the most active parts of the Dixie Fire. They are expecting that to connect with the major blaze right there. But just going back to how that spot fire started, it spotted about 5 miles. You think about the burning ember was picked up by the winds, dropped right down or right around there. A spot wasn't 7 miles, but about a 5-mile spot distance, and then it pushed up into Janesville. And that was the big story we were talking about 2 nights ago, but you can see how the direction of growth on that spot fire has changed. The first night we were looking at it, it was just creeping closer and closer until it was in Janesville, and then ever since then, once that wind shift happened, it's moved farther and farther to the south. And I will say that area right there and that area right there have made a pretty significant southern push just in the last hour or two. So we will have to keep an eye on those areas. And if we actually want to see that spot fire from the Janesville cam, It's camera right up here. It overlooks Janesville. This is the one we were watching the first night when that spot fire was first going into Janesville. We could see people evacuating. We could see the lights in Janesville getting turned off when they cut the power. And then we could see the fire coming down this ridge line right here. And I know it's fairly difficult to see because the smoke is so hazy here, but you can see a couple little plumes still popping up on that ridge line, but the larger plume far off in the distance. So that gives you an idea of how in the past we were seeing a large amount of fire activity right on this ridge line right here. We do still have some fire activity, but it looks like the majority of it has moved down to the south. Again, just to get your bearings there, that's the camera. You can see how it's looking at the western edge of Honey Lake directly into Janesville. So you imagine that farther you go right here, the farther into that hot spot you get. So it's almost like cameras up here, and that big plume we're seeing in the distance is most likely where we see that intensity right there, with that large plume popping up in the far distance. So just to see that one more time now that we've caught our bearings, looks like less activity in Janesville. You can imagine these strong winds are pushing the fire actually away from Janesville, and you could tell it's strong winds just by how much the camera is shaking. But then you can see that plume far off in the distance, another one right there, as that part of the spot fire does start to pick up in activity as it moves farther south. So expecting that to continue to move farther south, and that area as well as this section of the Dixie Fire. Those are all the areas that are going to continue to see that southerly push because of those strong northerly winds that we're seeing right now. Key area where I don't want to see a southerly push is this area to the north of all the structures over Lake Almanor. But again, last time we heard an update from Cal Fire, it did sound like they're still feeling fairly confident in that area. So finishing up the update, and then we're going to look at the fire weather forecast for the Dixie Fire. Dixie Fire, actually that number wasn't the most recent update. This one is the most recent number. Dixie Fire is up to 662,000 acres with 35% containment. So very large jump from what we had yesterday. And if we want to see where that containment is, where you see the red on this map is where the fire is uncontained. Where you see that black line is where the Dixie Fire is contained. So key areas to look at here. You can see that the southern edge of the Dixie Fire has basically been contained for 2 weeks now. And that's because the majority of the winds over the last couple of weeks have been from the southwest. That's why most of our growth has been to the northeast. And that's why it's such a big change in the story that those northerly winds have come in, and now that we're starting to see most of our growth on the southern edges of those hotspot areas. Now, the other area that I'd love to see that containment is the area around Chester. So that's great to see right there. I'm hoping to start to see it on the northern shore of Lake Almanor, but I don't imagine that they'll turn that into officially contained until they really get a good handle on that hotspot that we're looking at right there. And then the other place that I love to see that black containment line. Sorry, computer is a little frozen. I have about 30 tabs open right now. Hopefully the video is not glitching too much. I also love to see that black containment line north of Quincy right there, because that's one of the areas where we did have a big concern in the past, but it does look like it is completely safe at this point, and that is an area where we do have a lot of structures. So just to wrap up the areas of most concern and where we're going to most likely continue to see some growth on the Dixie Fire, southern edge of this northwestern hotspot. The southern edge of this hotspot right here, I'm going to keep a close eye on the Taylorsville area, and if that continues to push down to where we have structures down in what appears to be almost a valley right there. And then also going to be keeping a close eye on these structures on the southern shore of Honey Lake, because that's one area of the fire that continues to see a big push as those northerly winds come in. So those are, I would say, the key concerns right now. Next on the concern list is Westwood. Didn't hear anything in the Cal Fire update that they have an immediate concern in that area, but we do have those two hot spots to the left and right of Westwood, and we do have a lot of critically dry fuels in that area, so I will continue to watch that. And then finally, that area around Lake Almanor as well. Sounded like Cal Fire was confident there, but certainly going to keep my eye on it. So going back to the numbers, like I said, there is a large number of evacuation orders in place, and you can find that by looking at the link in the description. I believe it's right there. Almost all of Janesville is in that evacuation order as of right now. Doesn't look like Susanville is yet, and that's mostly because those winds have shifted around, so we've seen less growth to the Susanville area, but would keep an eye on it up there just in case. As the wind shift comes in, I believe Friday and Saturday, we'll take a look at that in a second. So we do have some evacuation orders in place. I almost purposely don't go over those in these videos just because a lot of people watch these videos later after I post them. So I think it's always best just to click the link in the description and get the information straight from the source. But you can see large number of evacuation orders still in place. We did have an update when it comes to our structures destroyed, which was unfortunate to see. It looks like we are up to 1,208 structures destroyed. So as always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by the Dixie Fire. And I believe where the biggest update was is we did see some of these new structures destroyed pop up right there. But more importantly, we started to get some of that information back from where that spot fire went into Janesville just the other night. So I put the link for this in the description. You'll actually be able to click into this map. This is directly where we saw when we were watching that Janesville cam right here, when we were seeing that fire come down the ridgeline. People were evacuating on Highway 395. And because of that fire that made its push down, you can see some of those damage assessment teams have come back. One thing you can do with this map is actually click on the structure itself, and it will show you a photo so you can see just how hot that fire was when it came through. I looked at a number of these photos, and they almost all look like that, where the structure is just completely destroyed with nothing but dead trees around it. So again, that link is in the description. I know a lot of people have been in the live chat have been asking about that area, so does look like some of that information is starting to come back. And I will say, unfortunately, we will likely see that structures destroyed number continue to rise as more of those damage assessment teams come back. Now, I know that was some bad news, but we do still have some good news on the Dixie Fire, and that comes to just how much resources we have on this fire. We have 20 helicopters, 553 engines, 199 dozers, 184 water tenders, over 6,000 personnel. We saw that drop under 6,000 at one point. I think they did lose some personnel because some of the personnel actually had to leave to evacuate their homes because of the Caldor Fire, which we will be talking about in a second. But looks like we got back up to over 6,000, so lots of personnel in this fire, 84 crews as well. So I know there are some areas that do pose some major concern on the Dixie Fire right now, and we will be watching over the next 24 hours, in particularly the structures around Honey Lake. I'd say I'm watching this hotspot closely, and then also the Westwood Lake Almanor areas closely. But the good news is we do have 6,000 personnel, and we've been talking about this northerly wind push coming in for maybe 2 or 3 days now. So Cal Fire most likely saw this coming 5 to 6 days ago. So you can imagine they've been positioning resources in all those key spots, predicting that southerly push of these hotspots. So does look like some challenging conditions on the Dixie Fire throughout the next couple of hours, but we do still have a large amount of resources on that fire. So now to look at what's been driving that fire activity throughout the day today, and then also to look at the forecast for tomorrow. Best place to start is right here. What caused a lot of that activity last night that we were seeing was this low pressure system as it came through. That's what caused that big wind shift. You can think about the winds around a low pressure system, it's counterclockwise. So as that low came through, you can see that when you're on the left side of that, it brings those very strong northerly winds. And you can actually see that on the satellite imagery. I'll just bring back up the satellite imagery, because you can see all the smoke today is moving down to the south because we're on the left side of that low, and it's those northerly winds just pushing that smoke directly into California. Again, looking out my window right now, I still see a large amount of smoke and haze, much of California in that unhealthy air quality. We will take a look at the air quality forecast and current updates in a second, but you can see how usually we have southwest winds and it blows that smoke up in Idaho, but right now mostly northerly winds blowing that smoke directly down into California. So because of that, those northerly winds, we have seen a big change in the areas of the Dixie Fire that are increasing in growth. Again, in some cases, like the northern edges of the fire or Janesville, that's some good news because it pushes the fire either back into itself or away from your community. But then it also creates some new challenges, like any of those structures that are south of where we do have some of those hotspots. So good and bad news when it comes to those northerly winds. Now, once that low leaves, what's going to be taking its place? You can see it looks like those northerly winds remain, but then we start to shift back to a more normal pattern for California, just a ridge over us, which will just be some hotter, drier air. So looking at the Dixie Fire, let's see exactly where we want to look. I think the key spot to look at right now is perhaps that hot spot right by Honey Lake. So looks like it's still being pushed by some 25-mile-per-hour wind gusts that you can see are coming from the north right now. I probably should have shown this map earlier because it explains exactly what I've been talking about, where you have that hot spot north of Lake Almanor. It's these winds that act to push that hot spot farther south, which is why I do have some concern there. Same with that hot spot down somewhat near Taylorsville, and then also around that Honey Lake area. As we click throughout the night, the bad news is that even up to 8 p.m., we are expecting those gusty winds to continue. North of Lake Almanor and the Westwood area, still seeing some northerly wind gusts around 25 to 30 miles per hour. Looks like it's similar story for the areas around that hotspot near Honey Lake, still 25 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts there. So when it comes to those areas where we are still seeing a large amount of growth, looks like we will have some challenging conditions over the next maybe 3 hours. But then as we start to get into later tonight, 11 p.m., really starts to calm down north of Lake Almanor. And then as we get into the early morning hours, calms down even more, but not as calm as you would like to see it during the overnight. Usually overnight, you calm down to maybe 5 to 10 miles per hour. Looks like those northerly winds will be continuing about to 15 to 20 miles per hour through the overnight hours, which I believe, if we look at that red flag warning, I believe it lasts until tomorrow morning. So until 8:19, 11 a.m. That basically answers the question of why that red flag is sticking around until tomorrow morning. It's because even during the overnight hours, we still have some of those gusty winds, and key area to watch, I think, will be that northwestern section of the fire, because they're expected to still have 25 to 30 mile per hour winds even into tonight. So to actually see an animation of how those winds are going to be interacting with the fire, I'll bring up Wharf S Fire. So key spot throughout the next few hours and into tonight that I would say to watch would be that northwestern section in particular, but then also anywhere south of where we were talking about some of those hot spots. So around Lake Almanor, right around here, possibly that hot spot as well, though looks like that's about the domain of where we run this Wharf S Fire model. Oh, I didn't really say what this was yet. Just in case you're new to this channel, this is the Wharf S Fire wildfire model. We run this out of the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory. It's one of the top wildfire models in the world because it combines the heat and the fire perimeter with the fuel, the weather, and the topography, and then also simulates how the wildfire would then create its own weather as it starts to generate heat and its own winds. So main reason I always show this is because usually it does give a pretty accurate idea of what spots will be seeing the largest amount of growth over the next 48 hours, but it also is a perfect illustration for how winds interact with wildfire. So if we just click play here, you can see it's starting at about 5 a.m. this morning, so you'll be able to see what was forecasted throughout the day today. You can see it was forecasting those northerly winds, and especially that big push of fire in the northwestern section. Just in case you missed it, go back to the beginning. Keep an eye out on that northwestern section right there. Northerly winds come in, pushes that fire down to the south. That is an illustration of everything that I've been trying to describe throughout this video so far. So now we're about to come up to where we are as of right now. So getting into tonight, we'll see where it's still expecting some growth. Looks like it is still pushing the fire farther south in that area. We are seeing some growth right there as well, where those winds are funneled through that kind of drainage area, but most of that growth on that northwestern section, which makes sense because when we're looking at the windy map for tonight, that is that strip where we're expecting the strongest winds. So I'd say pretty spot on the Warfest Fire model of where it's expecting the fire growth tonight. And then as we go into tomorrow, so this is now 12 o'clock tomorrow, it looks like the model is still predicting northerly winds. So doesn't look like we're going to be seeing that big wind shift we usually do throughout the afternoon hours where it shifts to southwest at 12 p.m. But continuing to see those northerly winds, and you can see because of that, areas south of where we have that fire perimeter is where it's predicting the largest amount of growth. Especially if you go back and forth, you can see where it's predicting that growth. So especially on that northwestern section, makes sense looking at the windy map. That's where we're going to have the most amount of winds tonight. And that is where Cal Fire was saying they were seeing a lot of growth. Also down here, that's actually exactly where we have seen a lot of those hotspots continue to move south over the last maybe 3 to 5 hours. So we're actually seeing this model play out in real time right now in both that area and the northwestern section. Where I might disagree with this model, actually one more area where I do agree, is it does have more growth right there as well. That's that finger that was stretching up near to Susanville, but as those winds have shifted around, the fire growth has shifted around. And that is one of the spots that we were seeing a lot of activity today. So I would say, oh, you got a sneak peek that we're also going to be looking at the simulation for the Caldor Fire. I would say model was pretty spot on predicting large amount of growth on that northwestern section where we had that hotspot here, and then also that finger that was stretching up into Susanville. But then as we go through this model, you can see pushing that fire unfortunately closer towards Westwood, which is one of the reasons we will keep an eye on Westwood. But good news for Susanville, looks like it's pushing that area farther away. Now, one spot that I'm hoping the model is wrong, and if I had to guess right now based on the information that we have at hand right now, again, information can change in just the course of 10 minutes, but where I think I would disagree with this model is on the area north of Lake Almanor and Westwood. It is predicting a large amount of growth right there, but given the last Cal Fire update, sounded like they were fairly confident there. They had some good containment lines, some good dozer lines, and some structure protection. So that is where I always preface that this model does not take into account fire suppression tactics. So any growth that it's expecting is likely to be less. This shows exactly what kind of growth we would get. Oh, I gotta plug my computer in. Don't want it to die in the middle of a live stream. So this is showing what kind of growth we'd see on the fire if the wildfire was just allowed to behave by itself. But luckily, we have 6,000 firefighters on this, so unlikely that we're actually going to see that much growth. But I'd say the key spots where it is showing growth are pretty spot on, mostly in that northwestern section, the finger that was stretching up into Susanville, and then that hotspot down there. And it's a shame we can't really see what's going on with the hotspot around Honey Lake, but looks like it starts to almost look like those are converging, which is also a prediction that the Cal Fire representative was saying. So, just to wrap up the Dixie Fire, I would say overall some good news and bad news. Just looking at it throughout the course of the day today, usually that smoke is blowing up into Idaho. You can see with that wind shift, that smoke has started to push farther to the south. And just looking at the windy map, we are going to continue to see those northerly winds throughout the night tonight. So we're most likely going to continue to see growth on all these hotspots farther to the south, the same way we've been seeing them over the last couple of hours. Especially southern edge there, southern edge right there, southern edge of that hotspot. So those are some of the key areas I'm watching. And I'm also going to watch the areas around Westwood, Lake Almanor very closely. And then also this area to the northeast of what I believe is Taylorsville. Certainly don't want to see that hotspot move any farther down into that section. Now, looking at the windy forecast for tomorrow, let's just go straight into tomorrow afternoon. Some good news and some bad news. You can see still expecting some strong northerly winds, 15 to 20 miles per hour, but that looks a lot better than the forecast looked the last 2 days. The last 2 days when we were looking at this, we had 35 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts expected. So still do have some gusty winds coming in, but a lot better than previous forecast periods. And you can just tell that's the case because that red flag warning is ending at I believe 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. When it comes to the temperatures, going to still be relatively warm in the mid to high 70s. And then the one factor that will combine with those relatively gusty winds to continue to see some fire growth is the fact that we are going to remain dry when it comes to our air, but then also critically dry when it comes to our fuels. So unfortunately, still going to be seeing some growth on the Dixie Fire over the next 24 hours, although I would say it looks better than the last 2 days. So that's maybe the fire weather summary. Looks better than the last 2 days. And then just one sneak peek way into the forecast. It looks like we may be having another low coming in Friday and Saturday, where unfortunately we might have a repeat of what happened the last 2 days, where we get those strong southwesterly winds coming in first, and then a northerly wind event right afterwards. As of right now, that one, it looks a bit weaker than the event that came through the last 2 days. That's why I'm purposely not spending too much time on it yet. Still a ways off, and the model will likely change, but that is just something that we most likely will be talking about in future update and forecast videos. So, one second, there's a spider trying to crawl on my computer. Haven't had that happen before. I have had a turkey fly into my window, though, as I was in the middle of a live stream. So I think that basically wraps up the Dixie Fire. Most of that growth is on the southern edge of where we see those hotspots. Those northerly winds will be continuing throughout the night tonight. We do still have that red flag warning until about 11 a.m. this morning. So if any area south of those hotspots, I would say is an area to continue to watch over the next 24 hours. We will still have some gusty, dry conditions tomorrow, but I would say overall looking better than our forecast the last 2 days. So now I want to let's go down to the Caldor Fire first, because this is actually going to be where some of the good news comes in. Yesterday, I think this was the main fire we were talking about yesterday, because I believe in the morning it was about 6,000 acres, and in the afternoon it was 50,000 acres. We just had a massive amount of growth on that one. It was honestly growing faster than I think I've ever personally watched a wildfire move in a day, and that was leading to some new evacuation orders. It was basically moving so fast that they couldn't even try to stop it. They were pretty much just focused on getting people out into safety, not even able to do that much structure protection. Just protecting life was the key concern on that, and it's unlikely that they would have been able to do that much suppression anyway because of just how intensely it was burning. They did have some aircraft on it, earlier in the day yesterday, but then they had to pull it because of reduced visibility. And I don't imagine they were able to use any aircraft on it throughout the day today, but because the smoke was so thick. But the smoke, I would say, was actually a good thing for the Caldor Fire throughout the day today, because just looking at it yesterday, we had a massive pyrocumulus cloud coming off of this. Some of the live cams we're looking at were some of the most extreme wildfire videos that we've watched this entire year. But you can see that because of all that smoke from the Dixie Fire and some of the smoke that the Caldor Fire produced itself, it actually created a protective layer over itself. This is something that we've seen on a number of wildfires, both this season and last year in 2020. When you get such a thick smoke layer over you, it actually calms down the fire behavior. It's almost like a negative feedback loop, where an increase in fire activity leads to an increase in smoke, which leads to a decrease in fire activity. The main reason for that is the sunlight and that solar radiation can't get in. And we've actually seen this on the Dixie Fire before over the last couple weeks, where the forecast, I remember one day the forecast was supposed to be 95 degrees, and then we had such a thick smoke layer that solar radiation couldn't come in, and we ended up only being 71 degrees. So huge amount of cooling that can happen. And when you're cooler and you get less of that temperature gradient in the afternoon, that also keeps your winds down as well. So on the Dixie Fire, that one time we were expecting some 30 mile per hour wind gusts, and then the winds only ended up being about 15. And that same kind of behavior has been taking place over the Caldor Fire throughout the day today, which is terrific news, because this thing was behaving like honestly nothing I'd ever seen before yesterday. So that thick smoke layer we had over the fire today created a very strong smoke inversion. Doesn't look like we've broken through it at all. Sometimes you'll see the pyrocumulus punch through that smoke and then the fire starts to take off, but doesn't look like we punched through it at all today. And now, as you can see, that satellite imagery starting to switch to nighttime, looks like overall it is a good day for the Caldor Fire. Just looking at the heat detection, again, it might be somewhat calmer than it actually is just because it has to go through all that smoke to see the heat. But yesterday that was glowing completely bright red. So definitely less activity on the Caldor Fire today because of that thick smoke we had, basically acting as a protective barrier, keeping the temperatures cooler and the winds calmer. And that strong northerly wind event that we were expecting in this area never really came in for the Caldor Fire today. So I think this perfectly sums up what I'm talking about. If you remember, this is the Leak Springs camera. This is the one we were watching yesterday, where it was one of the largest smoke plumes or pyrocumulus clouds that I personally had ever seen on one of these cameras. And you can see what this same camera looked like today. Obviously, that doesn't look good. It looks like you can't really see anything. But when it comes to fire behavior, sometimes that's actually exactly what you want to see. You'd imagine sunlight trying to find its way through that to heat up the fuels, heat up the fire, really get it going. And I don't know exactly what our forecast was, but if the forecast was for 90 degrees, I would imagine we only got to maybe 75 degrees throughout the day. That's usually what we see, a cooling of about 10 to 15 degrees. So huge difference on the Caldor Fire between yesterday and today. Yesterday we had a gigantic smoke plume, and today that basically sums up the Caldor Fire. Lots and lots of smoke, and while that's bad for if you want to use aircraft or for air quality in general, it's good when it comes to fire behavior. So overall, I would say good news on the Caldor Fire throughout the day today. We can check out some of the hotspots because, again, we did still see some heat on this thing, and it does look like majority of that heat is on the southern edge there, which makes me think some of those northerly winds did find its way in. But what a difference between what this map looked like yesterday. Yesterday, this entire section right here was just bright red because it was all brand new, very high intensity fire behavior. I wonder if the fire perimeter shows how much that fire grew in one day, and that entire thing at one point yesterday was just active fire. And then it looks like as of right now, a bit more patchy, it's calmed down. And it sounded like for the fire suppression, it was less of a scramble today, just trying to get people to safety, and they're actually able to put in some strategy, start actually working on suppressing the fire itself, and not just on getting people out to safety. So overall, for the Caldor Fire today, great news, and it all comes down to that smoke that we had over it. So really, that kind of sums up the Caldor Fire. Very happy to say we don't have many updates. Now, one thing I will point out is it does look like that was that spot fire we were talking about last night. That'll most likely connect with the major blaze, but again, overall good news for the Caldor Fire that it gave us a little break throughout the day today, and that was exactly what we needed, because yesterday it went from about 6,000 acres to 53,000 acres. Now, one other thing, I want to update this because I want to see if that personnel has jumped up yet. I believe they were getting some more personnel. That looks like it's the same as what we were seeing yesterday, but I did hear that they were getting some new personnel into this incident. And one thing I will point out that is some unfortunate news is the Grizzly Flats area. I was looking at some footage coming out of Grizzly Flats, and you don't see the hotspots there right now, but where we have that fire perimeter, it was over that Grizzly Flats area, and I did see pretty high percentage of structures in that area that were destroyed. So again, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by this wildfire. Don't believe any of those damage assessment teams have come back yet with the exact number on the structures destroyed, but we most likely will get that information in the next couple of days. Now, one thing that I definitely need to emphasize when it comes to the Caldor Fire is, although it diminished throughout the day today, there are still a very large number of evacuation orders in place. You can see mandatory evacuation orders and very long list going down here. So I put the link for this in the description. You can also find that by going to InstaWeb and then the Caldor Fire. Now, one thing I do want to see is I believe we have that red flag warning over the Caldor Fire. And good news is the red flag that we had over it today, it didn't really materialize. Like I said, we didn't really ever even get those northerly winds. Didn't really get those northerly winds on the Caldor Fire. That is why we stayed relatively calm. But you can see that red flag warning is still over the Caldor Fire until 11 a.m. If we want to check the weather forecast out for tomorrow, again, it looks like we're still going to have a very large amount of smoke over the Caldor Fire tomorrow, based on how much smoke the Dixie Fire is kicking up right now. That smoke's there's northerly winds all night long, so that smoke's going to continue to be pushed over the Caldor Fire. So we have that red flag warning until 11 a.m., but what I'm hoping, I know it's weird to hope for a large amount of smoke in an area, but that smoke helped reduce the fire behavior over the Caldor Fire so much today that I'm actually hoping that smoke sticks around throughout the day tomorrow and we get another day of reduced behavior. As of right now, that looks to be the case, so I'm actually not even going to go over the weather forecast for the Caldor Fire tomorrow, because towards my gut, I think we're still going to have a large amount of smoke over the area. So whatever the weather forecast says is most likely going to be wrong, because of that factor I was talking about earlier, where you get a large amount of smoke, you end up being maybe 10 to 20 degrees cooler, and then if you were expected to have 30 mile per hour winds, you maybe only get 10 mile per hour winds. So actually not even going to look at the weather forecast there, because I do imagine we're going to have a large amount of smoke, and hopefully that is the case, because it certainly kept conditions calm over the Caldor Fire today. Now, very similar story when we look at the Monument Fire. That is another one of the fires that we were very concerned about yesterday. You can see right when we look back, it looked like some of those heat signatures were actually going away on this map. So definitely great to see that reduced activity, especially when compared to yesterday on the Hayfork Fire. Yesterday was just insane. So looking at the Monument Fire, now I would say you can almost take this as a good and bad news. Key area that we've been concerned about when it comes to the Monument Fire is Junction City and Hayfork. So Junction City, there was one day where we did see some of those hot spots over Junction City. So I believe there already have been a large amount of structures destroyed in that area. But the key area we've been talking about for the Monument Fire over the last, I think we've been talking about this for maybe 3 days now, as we were forecasting that northerly wind event coming in. If you look at the fire perimeter, consistently the most active part of the Monument Fire has been that southern and southeastern edge, and we really saw that start to take off yesterday evening once that wind shift happened. So Hayfork was the area that we've been talking the most about for the Monument Fire over the last few days, and you can see some of those hot spots are a bit closer than we would like to see. And I know that there are a large amount of new evacuation orders in the Hayfork area, and unfortunately, we are going to continue to see those strong northerly winds. So that is an area I'm watching very closely, because I think that does continue to be a very big concern, as those northerly winds will continue overnight. But overall, I would say Monument Fire was much better throughout the day today than I was expecting. And the reason for that, just like the Caldor Fire, the river complex really took off up here, and then it pushed all of its smoke over the Caldor, or over the Monument Fire, and that kept the Monument Fire much calmer throughout the day today. By that I mean temperatures were cooler, winds were calmer, and basically the same factor that kept the Caldor Fire calm was the same thing that led to some reduced activity on the Monument Fire today. We can look at the natural color fire as well. You notice that the hottest areas in California are where you aren't covered with that smoke. The northern areas of the Dixie Fire, where that smoke has actually been cleared out, and then the river complex as well, seeing more activity than we have seen on the river complex in quite some time, because that's the fire that in the past is usually covered in smoke from the Monument and Mcfarland Fire. And with that wind shift, now that one's in the clear, that one's picking up, and that smoke is going directly over the Monument Fire. You can still see some hot spot remaining there, but much, much reduced from what we were seeing last night. And just looking at the satellite imagery, last night we had a very large pyrocumulus cloud coming off of the Monument Fire directly, and clearly we aren't seeing that right now. But so overall, I'd say good news for the Monument Fire right now, but with an asterisk, because we do still have those hot spots there, and we do still have those northerly winds, so we're going to have to continue to watch the Hayfork area very closely. And I'm pretty sure that the entire area has evacuation orders, but if you haven't evacuated yet, I definitely would do so now, because we are going to continue to see those winds coming in. Oh, I realized I just forgot something here. So, we were supposed to look at the simulation for the Caldor Fire. This was what was supposed to happen throughout the day today. So that gives you an idea of what was expected, as we had the red flag warning forecast. Again, this is just in case you're new to the live stream, this is the WRF S Fire model. This is one of the top wildfire models in the world. We run this out at the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory. It combines the fire perimeter with the fuel, weather, topography variables, and then also how the wildfire will create its own weather. But one thing that I've noticed that this model doesn't have as a contributing factor yet is if there is a massive amount of smoke from another wildfire. I imagine that would be almost impossible. I guess you could work that into a wildfire model, but it would be very difficult, because then you'd also have to simulate that one to figure out how much smoke it's going to make, and then also have to figure out how much smoke is going to be over the fire. So I do want to show this though, because this is what was forecasted for the Hayfork or the Caldor Fire if that smoke wasn't over us. So I wouldn't even say that that's all that extreme for the next, that was what I was expecting for the next 2 days. Wouldn't even say that that's that extreme because we saw how much growth we had on this fire yesterday, but this model doesn't take into account all of that smoke that we had over us, never broke through that smoke inversion, so I'm very happy to report that that did not come true, and it's my prediction that we're going to continue to have very heavy smoke over the Caldor Fire tomorrow, just based on how much smoke is coming off of the Dixie Fire right now, and the fact that the winds are northerly overnight. So even though that tomorrow it was forecasting this much growth, I don't think that's going to happen either. I think that smoke will continue to be over the Caldor Fire and will continue to have that reduced behavior because of it. But again, back to the Monument Fire. Just want to point out again, key area of concern I think right now is the Hayfork area, as we do still have those northerly winds coming in, but much reduced activity there because of that thick smoke we've had over it throughout the day today because of the river complex. But when it comes to the Monument Fire, you can see this one is up to 128,000 acres and only 10% containment, with most of the new growth recently being on this eastern and southeastern edge. So that will continue to be the area that we watch the closest. Looking at the personnel, we have 920 personnel on this fire, and just like the Caldor Fire, I'm actually not going to go over the weather forecast for the Monument Fire because I think whatever the numbers are for temperature and winds, I don't think that forecast is actually going to end up coming true because we're still going to have so much smoke over the fire from the river complex. What I'm hoping is that that smoke does stick around and it reduces the fire behavior like we saw throughout the day today. So that's the Monument Fire. I guess the good one to go up to next would be the river complex because that is the one that is taking off right now. You can see a large amount of smoke being produced up there. If we look at the river complex, you can see, I would say that's the most active that we have seen the river complex, perhaps since it started. Because, again, usually it's covered in a lot of smoke, so it reduces some of the activity, but you can see it's in the clear right now, and definitely seeing a lot of activity on it right now. So, river complex, again, picking up compared to what it usually is, and we do have some scattered structures around the river complex, so I imagine because of the picked up activity there may be some new evacuation orders up in that area, so could be good to stay updated with the local resources. I believe I have the link to this in the description, but this is updated 6 hours ago. Let's see if they've updated it 59 minutes ago. We are now up to 53,000 acres with the river complex. It's at 10% containment. We have 806 personnel. And if I had to forecast continued growth, I would say most growth will be on the southern edge right there and the southern edge right here, as we will continue to have those strong northerly winds. What fire is this? Is this part of the river complex or is it its own fire? I think that says, let's turn off fire activity. You can. So I think that's called the Mcfarland Fire. Haven't looked at that one yet, but that one right there is a fire where we were seeing a lot of smoke coming off of that right now, and I hadn't noticed it before, but it does look like we have a fair bit of structures to the south there, and the northerly winds will continue to push that to the south. So, hadn't actually looked at that before, but we will have to keep our eye on that area right there to see if what I believe is the Mcfarland Fire. Correct me if I'm wrong. Again, I'm not looking at the live chat throughout this video because I'm trying to make it a lot more concise than usual. But I will try to answer some questions towards the end of the video. Want to just get out all the most important information right away first. So, didn't look at the river complex. Again, it's 53,000 acres, 10% containment. And then the other fire going on that had much reduced activity throughout the day today because of all that smoke that we had was the Mcfarland Fire, all the way down here. We have had some large pyrocumulus clouds coming off of this in the past, but You can see much more patchy growth throughout the day today because of all that smoke. Mcfarland Fire, let's update it, is up to 107,000 acres and 51% containment. So certainly still a very large fire that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Antelope does look like it's seeing some activity because it's not covered with as much smoke. That one is up to, let's update it again, see if it's been updated. That one is up to 60,000 acres and 27% containment. So when it comes to overall, we have the Dixie Fire, Caldor Fire, Mcfarland Fire, Monument Fire, River Complex, Antelope Fire. I would say the two most active fires right now are the Dixie Fire and the River Complex. And the main reason for that is because on the northern edges of those fires, we have a lot of flame because usually that's the front of the fire being pushed by those southwesterly winds. But as those winds have shifted around today, it's cleared out the smoke and it's allowed some of those northern edges to take off. Now in some of those spots, the fire is actually being pushed back into where it's previously burned in the past, which is some good news. For example, the areas like on the northern edge right here, the fire is just being pushed into where it has previously burned, so that's some good news there. Also some good news for the Susanville and Janesville areas where those winds are now pushing the fire away from those communities. But then with that wind shift, we do start to see some other concerns. Main concern right now, I would say, are all of these structures on the southwestern shore of Honey Lake, as we've seen this hotspot really take off over the last 24 hours, and those northerly winds throughout the night tonight will continue to push it south. We're going to have to keep a very close eye on this hotspot, and then I would say these two as well, just because of the fact that they do look like they're fairly close to Westwood and Lake Almanor, and we do still have those strong wind gusts throughout the night tonight. But last Cal Fire update did sound like they were feeling fairly confident in those areas, but I will keep my eye on those very closely, expecting the most growth on the southern edge of this northwestern section of the Dixie Fire over the next 24 hours. Main reason for that, we're going to have some strong northerly winds continue overnight, so definitely expecting more growth there, as well as the southern edge of that northern finger, that hotspot, and that hotspot there. So keep my eye on those. The overall summary for the Caldor Fire was we were covered in a massive amount of smoke throughout the day today. Very thick smoke inversion, kept our temperatures down, kept our winds down. We were supposed to have that red flag warning in that big northerly wind event, but that didn't materialize. So very happy to report that we have much calmer behavior on the Caldor Fire, and I am predicting that that smoke will be sticking around tomorrow, just based on how much is being produced by the Dixie Fire and those northerly winds continuing overnight. So what I'm actually hoping for is continued smoke over the Caldor Fire and the Monument Fires over the next 24 hours, because we can see how that calmed the fire down throughout the day today. So I'm hoping for that calmer fire behavior throughout the day tomorrow as well. So I think that pretty much sums up the fires. Now that we are talking about the smoke, we can look at the forecast for it. And this is what we want to look at. So right now you can see that with those northerly winds, it's taking the smoke from those fires, pushing it into California. Certainly had hazy skies throughout my area throughout all of today. There's the legend. You can see red is that unhealthy air. Purple is very unhealthy. That burgundy color, I don't know if you'd call that burgundy, that is hazardous air over the Dixie Fire. And most likely going to be looking like that tomorrow as well. We still have a lot of smoke being produced from the Dixie Fire and the River Complex. Northerly winds will continue to push that smoke down into California. So I would imagine another very bad air quality day for California tomorrow if we actually want to see that. This model has that smoke being produced by the River Complex and Dixie, and then those northerly winds blowing it right into California. Starts to clear up possibly in the very early morning, because it's predicting that the fires will calm down and produce less smoke overnight. But most likely some of that smoke's going to be settling down down to the surface, and if I had to make a prediction, I think we'll still have some unhealthy air quality throughout the day tomorrow. So hopefully that answered any questions you guys had. I was purposely trying to make this video a lot more concise than in the past, so that's why my apologies for not looking at the live chat at all throughout this entire video. Just wanted to get as much information out there as fast as I could, because I was starting this video later, because I really wanted to wait for that Dixie Fire update, because I was personally very unsure about that area around Westwood and Lake Amador, and I wanted to hear what they had to say before I started this live stream. So wanted to make it more concise today just for that reason, but then also because I live streamed for about 7.5 hours yesterday, and you could probably hear it in my voice that I've started to lose my voice, so I didn't want to do too long of a live stream throughout the day today. And I see that somebody sent in a very large super chat. Jonathan Morrison, thank you very much for that super chat. Again, sorry for not looking at the live chat throughout this entire video, just seeing that now. Thank you as well to Crosswave for the super chat. And I'll look... Oh wow, we've had a very active chat throughout this entire live stream. Thank you, Musings, for the Mind's Eye Tarot for the super chat. And I'll try to go down and see if I see any questions that we might be able to answer. So any word on the Cache Fire? So let's check it out. Best way to do this would be most likely to go to InciWeb first. That's kind of the... Doesn't look like InciWeb has anything yet. So let's see exactly where this is. Clear Lake's Cache Fire. I want to see where it is on the map, so then we could try to look at the hotspots. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to Clear Lake. Look at where some of those... And not seeing any hotspots popping up there. So don't think I'm able to answer that question as of right now, but I will keep an eye on that for future update and forecast videos. Oh, it does look, somebody just answered. They said it looked like Cache Fire was under control from what I could see on the helicopter video. That's some good news there. I would definitely agree we need some more firefighters on the Caldor. Luckily, the last report I heard, it sounds like some firefighters were going down to the Caldor Fire. Somebody said, why have they reopened Chester? I wonder if that was meant to be a why haven't they reopened Chester? Because I haven't heard anything about that. So yeah, I almost purposely don't stay updated with any of those reports about oh, I wonder if that was supposed to be Clear Lake, California. Yeah, it was. Okay, there's the Cache Fire. sorry about that. So there is that hotspot, and looks like that hotspot is over a large number of structures. So I haven't looked into this one. I was researching all the other fires before this video, so I will look into this one, and that'll be a key one that I include in tomorrow's update and forecast. And I see somebody said, is that Taylorsville that gets consumed? Believe you're talking about the Dixie Fire on that one. And again, that is one of the key areas that I am going to be looking at over the next maybe 24 hours, because that was one of the key hotspots that we have on the Dixie Fire right now. You can see where Taylorsville is. You can see where that hotspot is right there. Looking at this map, there's that hotspot that is to the southwest of Honey Lake. There's that hotspot let's see if we can see where Taylorsville with the structures. Does look like some of those hotspots are getting closer to there, and we do still have that same challenging wind direction throughout the night tonight, so we are going to have to keep a very close eye on that over the next 24 hours. I didn't hear Cal Fire say anything directly about Taylorsville in their update, which makes me hope that nothing too critical is going on there, but looking at that hotspot and how close it is to those structures, definitely going to be keeping my eye on that area as we move forward. Do I think they will do prescribed burns in the future to lessen the fuel over the years? I would imagine it. I follow a large number of Cal Fire people and also some wildfire scientists on Twitter, and also just follow any papers that come out, and it seems like one of the key things that we can be doing to reduce future fire danger is prescribed burns in the off season. So I imagine that there's obviously a large number of things that we need to do to try to make it so California does not look like this every single time we get into fire season. But I imagine that will be one of the tools that we start to use in the future. That is a great comment that somebody just posted. So the warning is due to a wind change that will happen late tonight. They told me to use my best judgment and to evacuate if you feel unsafe, and if you do feel safe to stay put because the fire is currently not a threat to Amador County. So honestly, that's the same exact thing that I've done with all the wildfires that I've been threatened by in the past. I think I've gotten 2 official evacuation orders, and then I've also evacuated myself 2 times just because I could feel it in my gut that it was a sketchy situation and didn't know if maybe the emergency alerts weren't working or anything like that. So that's something I always say in these videos. When it comes to evacuation orders, if you feel it in your gut, it's a good time to just head out, just because sometimes things can go wrong with those emergency notification systems. So you don't want to 100% rely on those. And then if you do get one of those notifications, then it definitely is time to leave. Is Caldor moving south? We just got an evac warning. So going on the Caldor Fire, we did talk about this briefly, but so yesterday you can see where that fire perimeter was. Most of the growth yesterday was to the northeast right there, but if you look at where the hotspots are right now, most of the majority of the activity is on that southeastern edge of the Caldor Fire. Looks like there is a hotspot over on the western edge, and that spot fire is still burning. But because of those northerly winds, again, the whole northerly wind event didn't really materialize over the Caldor Fire throughout the day today as much as it was supposed to. But we did still get some northerly winds, so we do still have the majority of the growth on the Caldor Fire has been on that southern and southeastern edge. And then again, I will look more into I believe it was called the Cache Fire and the French Fire for future videos. And yeah, I see a large number of questions in there, but again, I am trying to keep this update today very concise. So again, just the final summary. A large amount of activity going on the Dixie Fire right now. You can see how those northerly winds are pushing the smoke to the south, which means that those key hotspots on the Dixie Fire will be moving to the south. And really, any wildfire that is going on right now, we're going to continue to have northerly winds throughout the night tonight. So any hotspot that you see on this map, there is a good chance for it to continue to move to the south over the overnight hours, as winds will be staying strong until about 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's how long that red flag warning was staying in place. We zoom in there. You can click on the red flag warning and you can see it stays in place until about 11 a.m. tomorrow. So definitely, although I've maybe sounded like everything is in good news throughout this video, I would say there definitely are some challenging conditions on the Dixie Fire especially, and especially on that hotspot right there and that hotspot right there. But overall, I think I put off the vibe that it was a good news day because I was so happy to see that areas like the Monument Fire and the Caldor Fire weren't as bad as they were supposed to be with that red flag warning. So overall, a lot of activity still going on the Dixie Fire. I think that'll be crucial to stay updated on over the next couple of hours. But I am planning on saving my voice for the update and forecast videos tomorrow morning, where I'll try to do a more extended forecast on all these various fires going on. So you can subscribe to my channel or click the notification bell as well so you get notified when I go live. And I apologize for this not being as long of a video as yesterday. Kind of burnt myself out with that 7.5 hour live stream yesterday. But hopefully I was able to answer some of your questions. Hopefully it was helpful. Big thank you to all of our firefighters. Thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by these wildfires. And thanks for watching.